My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 42 years old. 3 years ago, I stood beside my father's mahogany casket while over 800 people came to mourn one of the most respected businessmen in America. Presidents sent flowers. Fortune 500 CEOs flew in on private jets. Television crews lined the entrance of the cathedral. The newspapers called him the builder of an empire. They described him as a visionary, a philanthropist, a billionaire, a man who changed thousands of lives. To me, he was just Dad. The man who never missed my birthday. The man who taught me to ride a bicycle after I scraped both knees and wanted to quit. The man who used to say, "Claire, never measure a person by what they own. Measure them by what they protect when nobody is watching." I didn't fully understand those words until the day we buried him. Because while everyone else was crying, my family was already dividing his kingdom. If you've never attended the funeral of someone extremely wealthy, let me tell you something. Grief isn't the loudest emotion in the room. Greed is. People hug you while calculating what they might inherit. They tell stories about generosity while wondering whose name is in the will. And every smile feels just a little too rehearsed. I noticed it before the service even began. My older brother, Victor, wasn't comforting our relatives. He was whispering with the family attorney. My younger brother, Ryan, wasn't greeting guests. He was making phone calls behind the cathedral. And my stepmother, Eleanor, she cried beautifully whenever cameras pointed toward her. The moment they turned away, the tears disappeared like someone had flipped a switch. Maybe I should have noticed sooner. Maybe Dad had. The service itself was exactly what my father would have hated. Too extravagant, too formal. Too many speeches by people who barely knew him. Executives praised his leadership. Politicians praised his generosity. Investors praised his brilliance. No one talked about the man who secretly delivered Christmas presents to employees who couldn't afford them. No one mentioned that every Thanksgiving, he personally served dinner at a homeless shelter without allowing anyone to take photographs. That was my father. Not the billionaire on magazine covers. The man behind them. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't bring notes. I didn't need them. I looked at the crowd and smiled through tears. My father believed success wasn't measured by the size of your bank account. He believed success was measured by the number of people who felt safer because you existed. The cathedral became completely silent. I once told me that if money ever became more important than family, then the money had already cost too much. I looked toward my brothers. Neither one looked back. At the time, I thought they were grieving. Now I know. They simply couldn't meet my eyes. After the burial, everyone gathered at my father's estate. Whitmore Manor had been in our family for nearly a century. It overlooked Lake Michigan. 42 acres of gardens, a private library with more than 12,000 books. Portraits of generations of Whitmores watched from the walls. As a little girl, I used to race through those hallways pretending they were castle corridors. That house never felt intimidating. It felt like home. I didn't know. It would be the last day I would ever belong there. The guests slowly began leaving. Only immediate family remained. Victor poured himself a glass of 12-year-old scotch. Ryan loosened his tie and sat in Dad's favorite chair. Eleanor removed her black veil. It was remarkable. Within 10 minutes, no one looked like they had just buried a husband or father. Victor finally broke the silence. "Tomorrow's going to be busy." Ryan nodded. "We should meet with the board first thing." I frowned. "Tomorrow?" Victor looked surprised. "The company can't stop because Dad died." "I know. But maybe we should wait a few days." He smiled. Not kindly, patiently, the way adults smile at children who don't understand something obvious. "That's exactly why Dad never put you in charge." The words landed harder than I expected. "I've been chief operating officer for 8 years. I know exactly how the company works." Ryan laughed quietly. "You managed people? We built the business." I stared at him. "Our father built this business." Neither brother answered, because deep down, they knew it was true. Eleanor stood and walked toward the fireplace. "Your father wanted stability. That's what matters now." I looked at her. "We haven't even discussed what Dad wanted." She smiled politely. "Oh, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised." Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. Not because of the words, because of the confidence. Like someone who already knew the ending of a story I hadn't started reading. Just then, the front door opened. Our longtime family attorney, Harold Bennett, walked inside carrying a thick leather briefcase. He looked uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. "I wasn't expecting you until Monday," I said. "I know." He avoided my eyes. "But your father left very specific instructions." Victor stood. "It's time. Time." "For what?" Harold slowly placed the briefcase on the dining room table. He unlocked 2 brass clasps, opened the lid, and carefully removed a large sealed envelope. Across the front, written in my father's unmistakable handwriting, were 7 words that made every hair on my arms stand up. "To be opened only after my burial." No one spoke. Harold took a slow breath, then looked directly at me. "Claire, what I'm about to read is going to change everything." The room became so quiet. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway. Tick, tick. For 30 years, that clock had marked birthdays, Christmas dinners, and family celebrations. Now, it sounded like a countdown. Harold Bennett adjusted his glasses. His hands trembled ever so slightly as he broke the wax seal on the envelope. "I want everyone to understand something before I begin," he said. "This document was delivered to my office 6 months ago. It remained in our firm's secure vault under your father's written instructions." Victor folded his arms. "Then let's get on with it." Harold nodded. He unfolded the papers. "This is the last will and testament of Jonathan Edward Whitmore." Hearing my father's full name made everything suddenly feel real. For weeks, I'd convinced myself this was all a terrible nightmare, that I'd wake up and hear him humming while making coffee downstairs. Instead, I was about to hear his final words. Harold began reading, "My beloved children. If you're hearing this, then my time has ended. I hope you remember that wealth is never the greatest inheritance. Character is." My eyes filled with tears. That sounded exactly like Dad. "I leave several charitable foundations fully funded. I ask that my employees continue receiving their annual education and healthcare benefits." I smiled. Even in death, he was thinking about the people who worked for him. That was my father. Then Harold reached the section everyone had been waiting for. "My business interests." Victor leaned forward. Ryan stopped pretending to check his phone. Even Eleanor straightened in her chair. "Shall be distributed according to the attached ownership schedule." Harold turned the page. His expression changed, only for a second. "But Victor said impatiently. "What does it say?" Harold cleared his throat. "The Whitmore Group, including all controlling shares, shall pass equally." He stopped, blinking twice. Then continued, "To Victor Whitmore and Ryan Whitmore." I frowned. Wait. What? Surely there was more. Harold kept reading. "My daughter, Claire Whitmore, shall receive ownership of Lakeside Cabin Number 7, together with its surrounding land and personal contents." That was it, no company. No voting shares, no seat on the board. Just an old cabin. I looked at Harold. There must be another page. There isn't. I stood up. "No, my father would never do this." Victor slowly smiled. Not a joyful smile, a victorious one. Ryan leaned back in his chair as though he'd been expecting every word. Eleanor gently dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "I'm so sorry, Claire." The sympathy in her voice felt rehearsed. I looked at Harold. "You've represented my father for 27 years. You know this doesn't make sense." He looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I can only read the documents placed before me. My father spent years preparing me to run the company. I've served as chief operating officer. I attended every board meeting. I negotiated acquisitions. I handled international expansion." Victor interrupted. "You worked for the company. You didn't own it." I turned toward him. "Dad always said leadership had to be earned." Victor shrugged. Apparently they disagreed. Those words cut deeper than he realized. Because I knew my father. He wasn't perfect. He could be stubborn, demanding, impossible during negotiations. But he was never unfair. When I was 16, he made all 3 of us work summer jobs inside one of our manufacturing plants. Victor complained every day. Ryan quit after 2 weeks. I stayed the entire summer. Not because I loved the work, Because Dad had said something I'd never forgotten. If you ever lead people, you'd better understand what their day actually feels like. That lesson shaped my entire career. He didn't raise me to become an observer. He raised me to lead. So why would he suddenly leave everything to my brothers? It made no sense. The meeting ended awkwardly. Harold packed the documents into his briefcase. I'm available if anyone has questions. I have one, I said. When was this signed? He checked the final page. Approximately 4 months before Jonathan passed away. The 4 months. Dad and I had dinner together 3 months before he died. He spent 2 hours discussing the company's future. He told me to keep challenging the board. To never compromise my principles. Not once. Did he mention removing me from the inheritance. After Harold left, Victor walked toward the dining room window. The board meets tomorrow morning. I'll officially become chairman. Ryan smiled. And I'll take over operations. I stared at them. So that's it. Dade's gone 1 day, and you're already dividing offices. Victor sighed. This is business. No, I answered quietly. This is greed. He turned around. Be careful. Claire, you're starting to sound bitter. Bitter? I laughed through tears. I just lost my father, and apparently my family. Ryan stood. You still have the cabin. I looked at him in disbelief. The cabin? You mean the place with no internet, no staff, and a leaking roof? He shrugged. It's still worth a few million. A few million. As though that somehow balanced losing an empire my father and I had spent years building together. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the empty halls of Whitmore Manor. Every room carried memories. Dad teaching me chess in the library. Mom decorating the Christmas tree before she died. The music room where Dad insisted everyone sing terribly every Thanksgiving. I paused outside his study. The door was locked. Odd. It had never been locked before. I tried the handle again. Nothing. As I turned to leave, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Margaret, our housekeeper. She'd worked for my family since I was 12. She looked around nervously before speaking. May I tell you something? Of course. She lowered her voice. The day before your father died, he asked for you. I know. I was in Boston. She nodded. He seemed disappointed. What else? He gave me something. My heart skipped. What? She reached into the pocket of her apron. Carefully, she placed a small brass key into my hand. Only give this to Claire. Not before. Not after. I stared at the key. It was old. Heavy, its handle carried the engraved initials JW. My father said what it opened, I whispered. Margaret shook her head. No, but... She hesitated, and he smiled. If my daughter receives this key, she'll know they lied. Every hair on my arms stood up. They? I looked back toward my father's locked study, then down at the key resting in my palm. Suddenly, the will didn't feel like the end of the story. It felt like the beginning. I didn't wait until morning. If my father had trusted me with that key, there had to be a reason. The house was silent. Victor and Ryan had gone to bed hours earlier. Eleanor always took a sleeping pill after emotional days, or at least that's what she'd told everyone. I slipped off my shoes. The old hardwood floors had a way of announcing every step. As a little girl, I'd learned exactly where they creaked. Funny what childhood teaches you. Sometimes those lessons save you years later. Dad's study sat at the end of the west hallway. It had always been my favorite room in the house. Dark walnut shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Thousands of books, old maps, family photographs, a globe he'd bought in London before I was born. Every Sunday afternoon, we'd sit there drinking tea while he quizzed me on business history. Not because he wanted me to become a billionaire. Because he believed understanding history helped people avoid repeating it. I reached the door. The brass key fit perfectly. One soft click. The lock opened. The room smelled exactly the way I remembered. Leather, coffee, old paper. It felt as though Dad had simply stepped outside for a moment. His reading glasses still rested on the desk. An unfinished crossword puzzle lay beside them. A fountain pen sat uncapped. I reached out, then stopped, for a second. I forgot he was gone, my eyes filled with tears. I'm here. Dad. The words escaped before I realized I'd spoken them. The room answered with silence. I closed the door behind me, locked it. If my brothers saw me in here, whatever my father had hidden might disappear forever. I searched the desk first. Nothing unusual. Tax files, meeting notes, personal letters. Then I remembered something. When I was 12, Dad had shown me a secret compartment inside an antique roll-top desk. He'd hidden my birthday present there. "Never forget," he'd said with a smile. "The obvious places are rarely the important ones." I knelt beside the desk. Ran my fingers beneath the left drawer. There, a tiny wooden latch, I pressed it. A hidden compartment slid open. Inside, there was only one item, a folded note. In my father's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. "Claire, if you're reading this, then the study has already been locked by someone else." I froze. Locked by someone else. Dad had expected this. I kept reading. "Do not trust appearances. Do not trust urgency. And above all, do not trust anyone who insists everything happened exactly as planned." My breathing became shallow. The note continued. "The answers are not in this room. They're where your mother always found peace, Mom. She had died 16 years earlier." What did that mean? Where your mother always found peace. Then I remembered. The lake. Every summer, Mom escaped to a small cabin on the northern edge of our property. It wasn't luxurious. No marble floors. No chandeliers. Just a stone fireplace. A porch overlooking the lake. And a tiny garden she'd planted herself. After she died, Dad refused to change a single thing inside. The will had left me. Lakeside cabin number 7. The only property nobody else wanted. My heart started racing. The cabin. Dad hadn't been giving me the least valuable part of the estate. He'd been giving me something else. Something hidden, something only I would understand. A floorboard creaked outside the study. I folded the note instantly. Someone was in the hallway. The doorknob moved. Once. Twice. Then Victor's voice came through the door. "Claire." I didn't answer. "You in there?" I quickly slipped the note inside my jacket. Victor tried the handle again. "It's locked." Another voice joined him. "Ryan, what are you doing in Dad's office?" I forced my voice to stay calm. "I just wanted a few minutes alone." Silence. Then Victor said, "Come downstairs when you're finished." His tone sounded friendly, too friendly. Their footsteps slowly faded. I waited another 5 minutes before unlocking the door. The next morning, I left before sunrise. No goodbye. No announcement. I loaded a small suitcase into my SUV and drove toward the lake. The cabin sat nearly 40 miles from Whitmore Manor. Dad bought it before I was born. Mom called it her reset button. Whenever life became overwhelming, she'd disappear there for a weekend. No phones, no meetings, no headlines, just peace. As I drove through the old iron gate, memories flooded back. Fishing with Dad, roasting marshmallows, Mom laughing because I'd insisted every squirrel in the woods had its own name. For the first time since the funeral, I smiled. The cabin looked exactly the same. Weathered cedar walls, green shutters, a wraparound porch. The roof really did leak. Ryan hadn't been wrong about that. I unlocked the front door. Dust floated through the morning sunlight. Everything remained untouched. Mom's rocking chair still faced the lake. Her favorite blue blanket rested across it. I walked slowly through every room. Nothing seemed unusual. Maybe I'd misunderstood the note. Maybe there was no secret after all. I was about to leave when something caught my eye. The old fireplace. Not the fireplace itself. The stones around it. One stone was a slightly different color, lighter. Newer. Someone had replaced it. I knelt beside the hearth, pressed against the stone. It moved. Very slightly. My pulse quickened. I pushed harder. The stone slid inward with a low grinding sound. A hidden compartment opened beneath the fireplace. Inside was a small fireproof metal box, and resting on top of it was another envelope. This one had only 5 handwritten words. For Claire, trust nobody. I stared at the envelope for several long seconds. Then I carefully lifted it underneath. The fireproof box held a biometric lock, fingerprint activated. Only one person could open it, my father. Except, my father was dead, and somehow I had a feeling he had already planned for that too. I sat on the cabin floor for nearly 10 minutes, just staring at the fireproof box, a biometric lock. My father's fingerprint. He'd always loved new technology. He used fingerprint authentication years before most people even knew what it was. Which meant one thing. He knew exactly what he was doing when he hid this. And he also knew There was a chance he wouldn't be alive to open it. So why build a lock no one else could use? Unless there was another way. I picked up the envelope first. My father's handwriting had always been neat, strong, confident. Looking at it now made my chest ache. I carefully unfolded the letter. Claire, if you've found this box, then you've already realized something is terribly wrong. Good. Never ignore your instincts. They have saved more people than intelligence ever has. I smiled through tears. That sounded exactly like him. Then I continued reading. The fingerprint lock is not the real lock. The real lock is knowing where to look. I frowned. What did that mean? The letter continued. Turn the box over. I carefully lifted it. The bottom looked ordinary. Until I noticed 4 tiny brass screws. One of them was different. Instead of a flat head, it had a small star-shaped groove. I searched the cabin for nearly 20 minutes. Kitchen drawers, old toolboxes, the workshop behind the cabin. Finally, inside an old fishing tackle box, I found the exact screwdriver. When I removed the special screw, a tiny panel slid open. Behind it was a small keypad. My father hadn't expected me to use his fingerprint. He'd hidden a backup system. The keypad required 6 numbers. I tried my birthday. Nothing. Mom's birthday. Nothing. Their wedding anniversary. Nothing. 3 failed attempts. The screen flashed red. I leaned back and closed my eyes. Think, Claire. Think like Dad. He never used obvious passwords. He always chose dates that meant something emotionally, not publicly. Then I remembered. Every year on the anniversary of Grandpa Whitmore's death, Dad disappeared into this cabin. Not to grieve. Grandpa had built the first Whitmore factory. Dad always called that day the beginning. I entered day 03, 1962. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, a soft click echoed inside the box. The lid unlocked. Inside, there wasn't money. There weren't diamonds. There wasn't another will. There were 3 things: a leather journal, a black encrypted hard drive, and a small velvet box. I opened the velvet box first. Inside lay my mother's wedding ring, the one everyone believed had been buried with her. My eyes filled instantly. Dad had kept it all these years. Beneath the ring was a folded note. Your mother wanted you to have this when the time was right. I slipped the ring into my pocket, then reached for the journal. The first page stopped my heart. Private Investigation Journal, started February 12. Reason: I believe someone inside my own family is stealing from Whitmore Group. I whispered. No. The page after page, Dad documented everything. Suspicious wire transfers, missing inventory, executives suddenly resigning, board members changing votes without explanation. At first, he suspected outside competitors. Then, the names began appearing: Victor, Ryan, Eleanor, again and again. One entry was underlined 3 times. Victor insisted we replace the external auditors. Ryan approved 3 acquisitions I specifically rejected. Eleanor convinced several board members I was becoming forgetful. Forgetful. Dad had never mentioned that. I kept reading. Then my breathing stopped. March 18. Today I found a draft of a new will in my office. I never authorized it. I stared at the page. A draft, not the final document. Dad continued writing. Someone forged my initials. The signature was close, but not mine. My hands began shaking. The will. The one Harold had read. If Dad had discovered a forged draft months before his death, then whose will had we heard? The journal continued for another 100 pages. Every entry painted the same picture. My father hadn't suddenly changed his mind about me. Someone had been preparing to replace his real will. Months before he died. Maybe even years. Then I reached the final completed entry. It was written only 2 days before Dad passed away. If anything happens to me unexpectedly, it was never my intention to leave Claire out of this family. Tears rolled down my face. I knew it. Deep down. I'd always known it. The encrypted hard drive remained. I connected it to my laptop. A password screen appeared. No hint. No clue. Just one empty box. I almost laughed. Really, Dad? Then I remembered something. When I was 10 years old, he made me memorize one sentence. Not because it was poetic, because he said, "If you ever forget this, you'll lose more than money." The sentence was engraved inside every Whitmore pocket watch. I typed it exactly as he had taught me. Integrity before inheritance. The screen unlocked instantly. Folders appeared one by one. Financial evidence, board recordings, legal documents, video archive, insurance policies. My pulse raced. There were hundreds of files, years of evidence, enough to expose everything. Maybe. I clicked the folder labeled Video Archive. The first recording opened. The date was 6 months before Dad died. The camera showed his office. Victor stood near the window. Ryan paced across the room. Eleanor sat quietly. Dad remained behind his desk. The recording had audio. Victor spoke first. "You need to sign the new succession plan." Dad answered immediately. "No." Ryan slammed both hands on the desk. "You don't have a choice anymore." My heart stopped. Then Eleanor calmly said the words that changed everything. "If you don't cooperate, we'll make sure everyone believes you're no longer capable of running this company." The recording ended. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't greed. This wasn't a family argument. It was a conspiracy. And my father had known it was coming. Just as I reached for the next recording, a loud crash came from outside the cabin. Glass shattered. Then a man's voice echoed across the property. "Claire Whitmore! We know you're in there!" I froze. Someone had found me. My heart slammed against my ribs. The voice came again. "Claire Whitmore! This property is private." I quietly closed my laptop, pulled the hard drive free, slipped it inside my backpack. Then I grabbed my father's journal. If I had to choose between my own safety and those 2 pieces of evidence, the evidence came first. Everything else could be replaced. Those couldn't. Another crash. This time it came from the side of the cabin. A flower pot shattered against the porch. I crouched beneath the living room window and slowly peeked outside. 2 men. Neither wore uniforms. Both dressed in dark jackets. One carried a crowbar. The other was speaking into a phone. I had never seen either of them before. But something about the way they moved told me everything. They weren't there to ask questions. They were there to search. One of them tried the front door, locked. The other walked toward the garage. I remembered something my father used to say. Every building has 2 exits. If it doesn't, build one. As kids, Victor and Ryan always laughed when he said it. I never forgot. The cabin had a storm cellar beneath the kitchen. Most people thought it was only for bad weather. It wasn't. Dad had secretly connected it to an old maintenance tunnel that led almost half a mile through the woods. He'd shown it to me once when I was 13. "Never tell your brothers," he'd whispered. "They'd use it for hide and seek." I quietly lifted the kitchen rug. The metal hatch was exactly where I remembered. Rust covered the handle. It hadn't been opened in years. Outside, the men began pounding on the front door. "We only want to talk." Eliars always say that. I pulled the hatch open. Cold air rushed upward. I climbed down, closed it above me. Darkness swallowed everything. The tunnel smelled of damp earth and old wood. My phone flashlight barely reached 10 feet ahead. Cobwebs clung to the walls. I moved as quickly as I could without making noise. Behind me, a loud crack echoed through the cabin. The front door had finally given way. They were inside. I forced myself not to panic. Dad had always said panic wastes oxygen. Thinking saves lives. So I kept thinking, step after step, breath after breath. Nearly 15 minutes later, I reached the far end of the tunnel. A wooden ladder led upward. I pushed open the hidden trapdoor. Fresh air hit my face. I emerged inside an abandoned toolshed hidden deep among the trees. The cabin was barely visible through the forest. From this distance, I watched 2 men carrying boxes out of the front door. One of them smashed my laptop on the porch. The other searched my SUV. They were looking for something very specific. Not money, not jewelry. Evidence. I waited until they drove away. Then I returned cautiously. The cabin looked as though a tornado had passed through. Furniture overturned. Closets emptied. Every drawer pulled out. The mattress had been sliced open. Whoever hired those men believed I had something. The good news. They hadn't found it. The bad news. They now knew I was asking questions. As I stood in the ruined living room, I heard another vehicle approaching. This time it was a sheriff's deputy. He stepped out. "Mom, are you Claire Whitmore?" "Yes. We received a report of a possible burglary." I almost laughed. Someone had reported the crime after committing it. Convenient. The deputy walked through the cabin. "Anything missing?" I looked around. How could I explain? They weren't stealing. They were searching. For what? I don't know. That was only half a lie. I knew exactly what they wanted. I just wasn't ready to tell anyone. The deputy finished writing his report. If you remember anything. He handed me a business card. Give me a call. His name read, Deputy Daniel Mercer. He seemed sincere, professional. But after everything that had happened, I no longer trusted first impressions. That night I checked into a small motel 20 miles away. I pulled the curtains closed, locked the door, placed a chair beneath the handle. Then I opened my father's journal again. Near the back, one page had been folded. I'd missed it earlier. Across the top, Dad had written people I still trust. There were only 4 names: Margaret, our housekeeper; Harold Bennett, the family attorney; Samuel Green, retired chief financial officer; and Emily Rhodes, executive assistant. Only 4 people. Out of thousands, I frowned. Harold. That couldn't be right. He had read the will without questioning it. Unless he hadn't known it was fake. Or he had been forced to read it. I turned the page. Another handwritten note. If Harold appears frightened, believe him. If Harold appears confident, run. I read the sentence 3 times. What did that mean? Before I could think any further, my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated. Then answered. Hello, heavy breathing, no words. Just breathing. Then a familiar voice. Soft, weak, almost whispering. Claire, it was Margaret. She sounded terrified. They know about the cabin. I know. You have to leave. I'm already gone. No. You don't understand. Her voice cracked. They found the other key? What other key? A silence. Then she whispered 6 words that made my blood run cold. They're opening your father's vault tonight. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in disbelief. Other key? Vault. Dad had another secret, and if my brothers reached it before I did, everything my father had hidden could disappear forever. I called Margaret back immediately. Straight to voicemail again. Voicemail. A 3rd time. Her phone was off. I stared at the screen, willing it to ring. It never did. For nearly a minute, I sat frozen on the edge of the motel bed. They're opening your father's vault tonight. Those words echoed through my mind. What vault? Dad had owned safety deposit boxes at 3 different banks. But Margaret hadn't said bank, 'cause she'd said your father's vault. As if there was only one. As if I was supposed to know exactly which one she meant. Then it hit me. The wine cellar. Whitmore Manor had a climate-controlled wine cellar beneath the east wing. Most visitors thought it was simply a collection of expensive bottles. It wasn't. When I was 14, I'd accidentally knocked over a wooden rack, instead of breaking. The entire rack had swung outward like a door. Behind it was a reinforced steel room. Dad had laughed at my shocked expression. It's where I keep things more valuable than wine. What? Family history. He never showed me what was inside. He simply closed the door and locked it again. I'd completely forgotten about it, until now. I checked the time. 8:43 p.m. Whitmore Manor was almost an hour away. If Margaret was right, I didn't have much time. I grabbed my backpack, the journal, the encrypted hard drive, Mom's wedding ring. Everything else stayed behind. As I drove through the rain, memories kept flashing through my mind. Dad standing in that cellar, his hand resting on the steel door, looking at me with an expression I'd never understood. Claire, one day you'll realize. Some things aren't hidden because they're valuable. They're hidden because they're dangerous. At 14, I thought he was talking about money. Now, I wasn't so sure. The estate was almost completely dark when I arrived. Most of the lights were off. Only the east wing glowed. I parked behind the old gardener's shed, the same place I'd hidden after breaking Mom's favorite flower pot when I was 9. Funny how childhood hiding places remain useful. I quietly crossed the gardens. Every instinct told me to turn back. Instead, I kept walking. The side entrance was locked, of course it was. Victor had changed the security system after Dad died, but he hadn't changed everything. Dad hated electronic locks. He always insisted on one mechanical override. I reached beneath the stone lion beside the door, exactly where he'd shown me years ago. My fingers touched cold metal, the emergency key. Still there. Still working. I slipped inside. The house felt different. Empty, cold. It no longer felt like home. It felt occupied. I moved silently through the hallway. Voices echoed from somewhere below. The wine cellar. I crouched near the staircase. Victor was speaking. I want every shelf moved. Ryan answered. We've already checked twice. Then check again. Eleanor's voice joined them. If Jonathan hid anything, it'll be here. My father. They were still calling him Jonathan. Not Dad, not your father, Jonathan. As though he'd become an obstacle instead of family. I carefully looked between the railing. 3 men wearing work gloves were removing wine racks from the walls. Victor stood beside the hidden steel door. Open. Too late. They'd found it. A locksmith packed away his tools. Ryan disappeared inside the vault carrying a flashlight. I couldn't see what was in there. Only shelves, boxes, metal filing cabinets. Then Ryan shouted. It's empty. Victor stormed inside. What do you mean empty? There's nothing here! I frowned. Impossible. Dad wouldn't have hidden an empty vault. Would he? For nearly 20 minutes, they searched every corner. Pulled drawers apart. Opened every box. Nothing. Victor slammed a cabinet door so hard the entire room echoed. He moved it. When? I don't know. But he knew. Ryan kicked over a wooden crate. Then where is it? No one answered. Because none of them knew. A strange feeling settled over me. Relief. For the first time, my father had stayed one step ahead of them. As the workers began leaving, I noticed something. Inside the vault, mounted on the back wall, hung a framed photograph. Mom, standing beside the lake, smiling. Everything else had been searched. No one had touched the picture. Because why would they? Victor gave one final order. We're done here. One by one. They walked upstairs. I counted slowly, 10 seconds. 20, 30, silence. I slipped into the cellar. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure someone would hear it. The vault door remained open. I stepped inside. Dust covered the shelves. Empty filing cabinets lined the walls. Ryan had been right. The place looked abandoned. Then I looked at Mom's photograph. She wasn't facing the camera. She was looking toward the lake. Toward the old lighthouse on the north shore. I frowned. Why hang that particular picture inside an otherwise empty vault? Dad never believed in coincidence. I removed the frame from the wall. It felt heavier than it should. Turning it over, I noticed the backing had been replaced. Carefully, professionally, I opened it instead of cardboard. There was another envelope. My name appeared across the front. Claire. My throat tightened. He'd hidden a letter. Inside a photograph. Inside a secret vault. No wonder they hadn't found it. I unfolded it. Only one paragraph. If they've reached this room before you, then they already believe they've lost. Let them. The evidence was never kept here. This vault was built to distract the people I knew would betray me. If you're holding this letter, go to the North Point Lighthouse. Ask for Thomas. Tell him I finally kept my promise. He'll understand. Hurry. They won't stay fooled for long. Thomas. I had no idea who Thomas was, but before I could think any further, a floorboard creaked outside the vault. Someone had come back, and judging by the slow, deliberate footsteps, they hadn't forgotten something. They were looking for me. The footsteps stopped just outside the vault. I held my breath. The letter trembled in my hands. Whoever was standing there didn't say a word. They were listening, waiting. The silence stretched so long that my heartbeat became the loudest sound in the room. Then, a flashlight beam swept across the cellar floor. Someone had come back alone. I slipped behind one of the empty filing cabinets. The steel was cold against my back. The flashlight moved slowly through the vault entrance. A familiar voice muttered, "I know you're here." Ryan. Not Victor. Ryan. He wasn't shouting. He sounded curious. As though he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to find me. He stepped into the vault. I could see only his shoes beneath the cabinet. He looked around carefully. "You were always Dad's favorite." His voice echoed softly. I hated that. I closed my eyes, even now. He thought this had been about favoritism. Not trust, not hard work, not integrity. Just favoritism. Ryan sighed. "You know, I never wanted things to happen like this." My fingers tightened around Dad's letter. "Then why did you let them?" He answered the question I hadn't spoken. Victor said there wasn't another way. Another way to what? Take the company, steal the inheritance, destroy our family. I would probably never know. His phone rang. He answered immediately. Yeah, a pause. "No, she's not here." Another pause. I checked everywhere. He listened for several more seconds. then quietly said, "I'll meet you upstairs." His footsteps retreated. The cellar door slammed shut. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. I waited another 5 minutes before leaving the vault. Dad had taught me that impatient people rarely survive dangerous situations. Outside, the house was quiet again. I slipped out through the same side entrance and hurried toward my car. Halfway across the garden, headlights suddenly flooded the driveway. Another black SUV rolled through the gates. Not one of ours. The windows were heavily tinted. It stopped near the front entrance. Victor walked outside immediately. He wasn't expecting company. He was expecting someone specific. A tall man stepped out of the SUV, late 60s. Perfectly tailored navy overcoat, silver hair, confident posture, even from a distance. He carried himself like someone accustomed to being obeyed. Victor actually straightened his jacket before shaking the man's hand. That surprised me. Victor respected almost no one. The stranger handed him a thin folder. They spoke briefly. Then the older man placed one hand on Victor's shoulder and calmly said something that made Victor's face lose all color. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. For the first time in my life, I saw my older brother look frightened. The SUV drove away. Victor remained standing in the driveway for several seconds. Motionless, Ryan joined him. What did he say? Victor looked around before answering. I couldn't hear everything. Only 3 words. Find Claire first. My stomach tightened. This wasn't just my brothers anymore. Someone else was involved. Someone powerful enough to make Victor nervous. I drove away without turning on my headlights until I reached the main road. Only then did I stop. I unfolded Dad's letter again. North Point Lighthouse. Ask for Thomas. The lighthouse had been abandoned for years. At least, that's what everyone believed. Who lived there? And why had Dad trusted him? The next morning, I reached North Point just after sunrise. The lighthouse stood on a rocky cliff overlooking Lake Michigan. White paint peeled from the walls. Several windows were boarded shut. The place looked forgotten. Perfect. I climbed the winding path. Before I could knock, the wooden door opened. An elderly man with a gray beard looked directly at me. I've been expecting you. I froze. You know who I am. He smiled sadly. You have your mother's eyes. That makes recognizing you easy. You must be Thomas. He nodded once. And Jonathan finally kept his promise. Exactly the words from Dad's letter. Thomas invited me inside. The lighthouse was far larger than it appeared from the outside. Bookshelves covered the walls, maps, old photographs, stacks of neatly labeled archive boxes. This wasn't someone's home, it was an archive. A hidden one. Thomas poured 2 cups of coffee before speaking. Your father visited every month. For almost 9 years. 9 years. He said one day you'd come. What did he leave here? Thomas looked at me carefully. Before I answer, I need to ask you something? What? Why are you here? I frowned. My brothers stole my father's company. They forged his will. They've been lying for years. Thomas slowly shook his head. No. That's why you started, not why you're here. I didn't understand. He leaned forward. If all you want is revenge, you'll destroy yourself before you ever reach the truth. The room became silent. Then he stood, walked toward one of the archive shelves, and pulled out an old wooden box. He placed it gently on the table between us. This is what your father protected for almost a decade. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of photographs, financial ledgers, original contracts, and one sealed envelope marked open only after you learn who betrayed your mother. I looked up at Thomas, confused. My mother. Thomas's expression changed. For the first time, I saw genuine sorrow in his eyes. Claire, he said quietly. I don't think your mother died the way you've been told. I stared at Thomas. The words didn't make sense. Not because I hadn't heard them. Because I refused to believe them. My mother died in a car accident. I had repeated that sentence my entire life. To teachers, friends, reporters, my own children, if I'd ever had any. It wasn't just a memory. It was a fact. Or so I thought. Thomas didn't argue. He simply reached into the wooden box. Carefully, he removed a faded newspaper clipping. The headline read, Lokespe HLA therapist Keloidian Ahelios Sirish. I frowned. I've seen this before. I know. He slid another document across the table. This one was never published. It was a police collision report. The first page looked ordinary. Rain, poor visibility, vehicle left the roadway, driver pronounced dead at the scene, exactly what I'd always been told. Then I turned to the second page. Across the bottom, stamped in red ink, were 2 words. Cas Ropedi. What is this? Whispered. Thomas folded his hands. 3 days after your mother's funeral, a mechanic contacted the sheriff. He claimed the brake lines on her car had been deliberately cut. I felt the blood drain from my face. No, the investigators thought so too. They reopened the case. Then why didn't anyone tell us? Thomas looked toward the lighthouse window. Because before they finished the investigation, the lead detective retired unexpectedly. The mechanic withdrew his statement, and every remaining investigator concluded the damage happened during the crash. The case was quietly closed. Again, I shook my head. My father never said anything. I couldn't. Thomas answered gently. He promised your mother. What promise? To protect you? From what? Thomas hesitated, then quietly said, from the people responsible. I couldn't breathe. My entire childhood, I'd believed we were a family broken by tragedy. What if we had actually been a family targeted by betrayal? Thomas opened another folder. Inside were copies of Dad's handwritten notes. I'd recognize his handwriting anywhere. One entry caught my attention. Claire asked about her mother's accident today. I lied. She deserves the truth, but not until she's strong enough to survive it. Tears blurred the page. Dad had lied to protect me, not because he didn't trust me, because he loved me. Thomas handed me an old cassette tape. Your father recorded this 6 months before he died. You should hear it. I found an old tape player on the shelf. Pressed play. Static filled the room. Then, Dad's voice, older, tired, but unmistakably his. Kai, if you're listening to this. Then I wasn't able to finish what I started. My hands began shaking. There's something I've hidden from you your entire life. Your mother's death was never fully explained. I spent 16 years trying to prove what really happened, and the closer I came, the more dangerous our family became. I closed my eyes. His voice sounded so close, as if he were sitting across from me. The recording continued. At first I suspected business competitors. Later, I realized I was looking in the wrong direction. A long pause. Then, the threat came from inside my own home. I opened my eyes. Thomas wasn't looking at me. He was staring silently at the floor. He'd heard this recording before, many times. Dad continued. I don't know which of them participated. I don't know who gave the orders. But I know someone helped cover the truth. Claire, never accuse anyone without evidence. Feelings are not proof. Truth is. That was Dad. Even now, he refused to let anger replace facts. The tape clicked off. The room became silent again. After several minutes, I finally spoke. My brothers, were they involved? Thomas slowly shook his head. I don't know. Your father never reached that conclusion. He only knew. Someone inside the family benefited. I thought about that word carefully. Mom died. Dad became sole owner of the company. Years later, he remarried Eleanor. Victor and Ryan gained influence. Too many pieces, not enough answers. Thomas stood and walked toward another shelf. This is everything Jonathan trusted me to protect. He opened a steel filing cabinet. Inside were dozens of archive boxes, every one labeled by year, every one filled with evidence. Contracts, bank records, private investigator reports, board meeting transcripts, photographs, voice recordings, nearly a decade of work. My father hadn't spent his final years preparing an inheritance. He'd spent them preparing a case. As I carefully examined the files, one photograph caught my attention. It showed my father standing beside a man I didn't recognize. The date on the back read 9 months before his death. I turned it over. Dad had written one sentence. The only federal agent I still trust. Before I could ask Thomas who the man was, the old lighthouse radio crackled loudly. Thomas immediately walked over. His expression changed as he listened. He looked at me. They found this place. My heart stopped. Ooh. He looked out the window toward the winding road below. 3 black SUVs were climbing the hill. Slowly, deliberately. Thomas reached beneath the desk, pulled out an old revolver, then looked at me with complete calm. Claire, your father always knew this day might come. He handed me a thick manila envelope. Across the front, in my father's handwriting, were 8 words. If they find Thomas, run. Don't look back. Outside, car doors began opening. The first car door slammed shut. Then another. Then another. The sound echoed across the lake. Thomas didn't rush. That frightened me more than if he had panicked. People only stay calm when they've already accepted what might happen next. He quietly locked the lighthouse door, pulled the curtains closed, then looked at me. How much do you trust your father? The question caught me off guard. With my life. He nodded once. Good. Because what happens in the next 10 minutes depends entirely on that answer. Outside, footsteps crunched across the gravel. Someone knocked, not loudly, politely. 3 slow knocks. Thomas didn't move. Another knock. Then a deep voice called out, Mr. Thomas Reynolds. We're not here to hurt you. Would simply like to talk. Thomas smiled without a trace of humor. They always say that. He turned toward me. There's a trapdoor beneath the staircase. It leads to the old boathouse. I know where it is. Good. But you don't leave yet. I frowned. What? Your father didn't hide you for 9 years just so you'd run every time someone knocked. The knocking stopped. A few seconds later, the front door handle turned. Locked. Then came another voice. This one sounded familiar. Victor, Thomas. You know who's with you. We're asking nicely. You have 1 minute. Thomas laughed quietly. 40 years. And your brother still has no patience. Brother. I looked at Thomas in surprise. He caught my expression. I'll explain later. There wasn't time now. Thomas walked to the fireplace, reached behind an old wooden beam, and pulled out a thick leather binder. This is the master file. My heart skipped. The original evidence. Not all of it. The most important part. He placed it into my backpack. If they get this, everything your father sacrificed dies with it. I tightened the straps. I won't let that happen. I know. That's why Jonathan chose you. A loud crash shook the building. The front door splintered. They were coming in. Thomas calmly picked up the old revolver. I've never fired this at anyone. I hope today isn't the first. I stared at him. I'm not leaving you. You don't have that choice. He opened the trapdoor beneath the staircase. Cold air rushed upward. Claire, he smiled. The greatest mistake people make is believing justice belongs to one person. It doesn't. It belongs to whoever refuses to quit. Those were almost the exact words Dad used to tell me. For a second, I understood they had learned them from each other. Another crash. Heavy footsteps entered the lighthouse. Someone shouted, "Search every room." Thomas looked at me one final time. Go. I climbed down into the darkness, closed the trapdoor above me. Moments later, voices thundered across the floorboards overhead, furniture overturned, glass shattered. Someone yelled, "He's gone." Another voice answered, "No, find the girl." The tunnel was narrow, barely tall enough to crawl. The backpack scraped against the walls. Every few feet I stopped, listening. Above me, muffled footsteps. Then, a single gunshot. I froze. Silence followed. Then shouting. I wanted to go back. Every instinct screamed at me to help Thomas. But Dad had written those words himself. Run. Don't look back. For the first time in my life, I obeyed without questioning him. 20 minutes later, I emerged inside the abandoned boathouse. Rain had begun falling. The lake was almost black beneath the storm clouds. I climbed into my SUV and drove until the lighthouse disappeared in the rearview mirror. Only then did I allow myself to cry. Not because I knew Thomas was dead, because I didn't know. Sometimes, not knowing hurts even more. 2 days later, the news confirmed it. Local historian Thomas Reynolds missing after suspected burglary at North Point Lighthouse. Missing. No body, no arrest, nothing. Just gone. The police believed he'd wandered into the woods. I knew better. I rented another apartment under a different name. For nearly 6 months. I read every page inside the leather binder. Dad hadn't merely collected evidence. He'd organized it. Every document cross-referenced. Every financial transaction connected. Every witness identified. At the center of everything. One name appeared more often than anyone else's. Eleanor Whitmore. Not Victor, not Ryan, Eleanor. According to Dad's notes, she had quietly built alliances inside the company for almost 15 years. She recommended board members, introduced new attorneys, selected outside auditors, even encouraged Dad to change investment advisors. Every major decision somehow passed through her. She wasn't following someone else's plan. She was directing it. Then I found the document Dad had marked in red, open last. Inside was a handwritten confession, not from Eleanor, from Harold Bennett, our family attorney. My hands shook as I began reading. Harold admitted that 6 months before Dad died, Eleanor had pressured him to prepare a second will. When he refused, she threatened to expose a mistake he'd made years earlier that could end his legal career. He still refused. So another lawyer, one Harold had never met, prepared the forged version instead. Harold had suspected the will read after Dad's funeral wasn't authentic, but he had no proof. Until now, attached to his confession, was a forensic handwriting report proving Dad's signature had been traced from an older document. I finally had it, the proof I'd been searching for since the funeral. Not suspicion, not instinct, evidence, enough to challenge the will in court, enough to reopen the investigation, enough to bring down everyone involved. I closed the binder, for the first time in 3 years. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about justice. Tomorrow morning, I would walk into the office of the only federal agent my father had trusted. And if he believed the evidence, my family's empire would never be the same again. The next morning, I stood outside the federal building with a backpack that felt heavier than it should. Not because of its weight, because inside it was the truth. 3 years of lies, 9 years of my father's investigation, a forged will, financial fraud, witness statements, original contracts. Harold Bennett's sworn confession. If I was wrong, I'd lose everything. If I was right, so would they. The receptionist looked up. "Can I help you?" "Yes. I need to speak with Special Agent Marcus Hale." She frowned. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but tell him." I took a slow breath. "Tell him Jonathan Whitmore kept his promise." Her expression changed. She picked up the phone immediately. Less than 2 minutes later, a tall man in his early 50s walked into the lobby. He studied me for a moment. "You must be Claire. You knew my father." He nodded. "For 11 years. I wish we'd met under better circumstances." Agent Hale led me into a secure conference room. For nearly 6 hours, neither of us left. He examined every page, every audio recording, every photograph, every bank transfer, every handwritten note. He didn't interrupt. He didn't make promises. He simply kept reading. Finally, he closed the last folder. "This is the most organized private investigation I've ever seen." I smiled sadly. "My father never did anything halfway." "No, he certainly didn't." Then his expression became serious. "Claire, if these documents are authentic, they're authentic." He nodded. "I believe you." Those 3 words changed everything. Within 48 hours, federal search warrants were issued. Whitmore Group headquarters, Eleanor's private office, Victor's home, Ryan's lake house, the accounting firm's servers, the law office that had prepared the forged will. Everything happened at once. For the first time, my family wasn't controlling the narrative. The truth was, news helicopters circled headquarters all morning. Television reporters crowded the entrance. Employees watched federal agents carry out boxes of records. By noon, every major financial news network was covering the investigation. The same media that once called me a greedy daughter now called me the whistleblower who uncovered one of the largest corporate inheritance frauds in the country's history. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Truth has a way of exhausting everyone involved. 3 weeks later, the probate court reopened my father's estate. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, employees, shareholders, former friends, people who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly smiled as I walked past. Funny how quickly loyalty returns when the truth changes sides. Victor sat beside Eleanor. Ryan stared at the floor. None of them looked at me. The judge reviewed the forensic reports. Handwriting experts testified. Digital forensic specialists confirmed the timeline of the forged documents. Bank investigators explained how millions of dollars had been quietly diverted through shell companies controlled by Eleanor. Then Harold Bennett took the witness stand. He looked older, smaller, but when he spoke, his voice never shook. "I failed Jonathan Whitmore. I should have gone to the authorities years earlier. I was afraid. The courtroom remained silent. Doesn't excuse silence. He looked directly at me. I'm sorry, Claire. For the first time in years, I believed him. After 12 days of testimony, the judge delivered the decision. The document presented as the last will and testament of Jonathan Whitmore is declared fraudulent and legally void. A murmur spread through the courtroom. The judge continued. The original estate plan executed 7 years earlier is hereby restored. My father's genuine will. The one no one had ever seen. The clerk opened it. My heart pounded. Harold smiled through tears. I recognized this document. He looked at me. I witnessed it signing. The clerk began reading. To my daughter Claire, who has never asked for more than the opportunity to earn her place, I leave my controlling interest in Whitmore Group, not because she is my daughter, but because she has already proven she understands the difference between building wealth and deserving it. I closed my eyes. For 3 years, that was all I'd wanted. Not the money, the truth. Victor was convicted of conspiracy, securities fraud, and multiple financial crimes. Ryan accepted a plea agreement after agreeing to testify. He admitted Victor had convinced him the forged will was only correcting what Dad should have done. His tears couldn't erase his choices. Eleanor faced the most serious charges. The evidence showed she had spent years manipulating the board, arranging fraudulent transfers, and orchestrating the forged inheritance documents. Justice wasn't loud. It was methodical, exactly the way my father believed it should be. Several months later, the Whitmore Group officially reopened under new leadership. The first thing I did wasn't renovate my office. It wasn't buy a new car. It wasn't celebrate. I reinstated every employee scholarship my father had created. I restored healthcare benefits that had been quietly cut. I promoted people who had been overlooked because they refused to participate in corruption. Then, I renamed the company Auditorium, the Jonathan and Grace Whitmore Hall, because my mother deserved to be remembered beside the man who had never stopped fighting for her. One rainy afternoon, Agent Hale visited my office. He placed a small envelope on my desk. We finally found Thomas. My heart stopped. Hale smiled. Alive. He entered protective custody after the raid. He wanted us to wait until the investigation ended before telling you. Tears filled my eyes. Thomas had survived, just as my father had hoped. A month later, I drove back to North Point Lighthouse. Thomas was waiting on the porch. He looked older, but he smiled the same way. You finished what Jonathan started. I shook my head. None he did. I just refused to let them erase him. Thomas looked toward the lake. Your father used to say, the truth doesn't expire. I smiled. I know. He taught me that too. A year later, a young reporter asked me a question after a charity event. Whitmore, after everything your family did, do you feel revenge brought you peace? I looked at the building behind me. Hundreds of employees walked through its doors every morning. Families depended on those jobs. Scholarships carried my parents' names. The company had become honest again. Then I answered. I spent 3 years believing I wanted revenge. I smiled. What I really wanted was for the truth to survive. The reporter lowered her notebook. And did it. I looked toward the sky and thought about my father, about my mother, about Thomas, about every person who chose integrity when dishonesty would have been easier. Then I answered the only way I could. Yes. And that's worth more than any inheritance.